Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection. We will begin with our prayer of surrender. Spirit of truth, carry me where you will. Bring to me what you will. Take from me what you will. Awaken in me what you will. The Christ man is around me. The Christ mind is in me. The Christ power flows through me. And the Christ mystery exists as me. I believe it, I perceive it, and now I receive it. I am surrendered. Amen. And so it is. Okay, our devotion today is a part 3. We actually did part 2 yesterday in our 7 a.m. devotion, if you were with us. So we're wrapping up this little 3-part mini series today of Happy in My Own Clothes. And here's the affirmation. Today, I celebrate the beauty of God creating me as a unique individual. Therefore, I will wear my own clothes. I will be authentically myself because I am happy with myself. All right, so then my brother wrote this day, and he says, allow me to share 4 principles that might assist us in applying this idea of wearing your own clothes. Number 1, wearing your own clothes is being happy with yourself. Whoever you are, whatever your expression, happiness comes when you embrace you. Role-playing, false identities, and living to please others or get their approval will only produce regret, breed resentment, and assure inauthenticity. And that kind of leads into number 2, which is wearing your own clothes brings authenticity. Know who you are. Be who you are. Remember that your vibe attracts your tribe. When you wear someone else's clothes, you will never find your own tribe. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the other side of that in just a minute. Number 3, only borrow clothes if you have to, then return them quickly. Fake it for a season if you need to. Then he talks about the biblical story of Queen Esther. She went undercover, as it were, to save her people from impending genocide. Then, though, she returned the borrowed clothes. Moses, a Hebrew, lived as an Egyptian throughout his childhood, yet returned this disguise and came to his true self and delivered his people from bondage. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. So borrow those clothes, but never accept them as your own. Return them quickly. Okay, and number 4, don't buy clothes just because they are on sale. I like this one. Many of us have bought things that we do not need, like, and that did not fit us just because the original price was lower, just because we thought it was a great deal. Authenticity never goes on sale. Transparency cannot be found on the clearance rack. Being your true self is going to cost you something. Pay it. All right, great. So let's end with the prayer. Organic, authentic, genuine spirit, give me the courage to wear my own clothes today. Amen. Okay, so that was some wonderful wisdom there. And I'd just like to add that knowing yourself and being yourself is not only for your benefit, it also deeply affects the level of your relationship with others. So have you ever heard this quote? Others can only know you, love you, and meet you as deeply as they know, love, and meet themselves. So that's going to be part of our teaching today as well. You cannot give to others what you have not first given to yourself. We've talked about that before, and we'll mention it again today a little later. But the commandment that Jesus himself said was one of the greatest, one of only 2 that he thought were truly important, is love your neighbor as yourself. Now, let's think about that for a second. That means you can only love your neighbor as much and as deeply as you love yourself. So that's job number 1, loving yourself, and learning how to wear and be happy in your own clothes is the first step in that process. Okay, so deep breath in, and now let's say our connection affirmation. I allow perfect health in my body, perfect peace in my mind, perfect unconditional love in my heart, and the perfect divine timing of spirit to guide my life in I said that one word wrong and it threw me off. I think I said thwart instead of third. I don't know what I was trying to say. Anyway, you get the point. We've said that 100 times. All right. I was listening to a podcast this week while I was doing something else. I think I was cleaning the kitchen or something, and so it was just kind of on in the background. But do you ever find yourself when something's just kind of background noise, but then some little something that is said will catch your attention, and you'll stop and start listening? So that's what happened. So when I heard it, I went over and stopped it and replayed it so I could hear it again. And this is what he said. This guy said, "My divine trinity is consciousness, information, and meaning. You can't talk about any one of those without invoking the others." So then he went on for a bit explaining how he connects these three in his mind: consciousness, information, and meaning, and how this triangle of concepts forms the foundation for and are the actual components of something we call intention, which is a powerful concept that we can learn to use. I don't think very many of us truly understand how powerful our intention is. So that podcast and his thoughts on that were the seeds of a teaching that I started working on, that I'm continuing to work on. It's not finished. I'll probably bring it to you next week, but I thought we'd back up a bit and look at the other side of intention and how not to use it. So here on earth, where we live in duality, we often learn by opposites, knowing what we want by learning what we don't want, okay? Learning the right, I don't really like to use the terms right and wrong, but the effective way to do something by doing it ineffectively and realizing that's not working, so then you do it the effective way. So before we talk about the appropriate way to use this tool of intention, we're going to spend a little time talking about how not to use it, okay? And so my title today is "The Road to Hell is Paved with Good Intentions." Here we go. So let's begin with a couple of quotes. I only have two for you today. The first one: "People with good intentions make promises, but people with good character keep them." I like that. All right, so this next one is one I've given you before, and you have to listen to it closely. "Your talk talks, and your walk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks." So that was by John C. Maxwell. And I'm going to repeat that because it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but when you think about it, you get what it's saying. Your talk talks and your walk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks. Okay. So walking your talk is more important than talking your talk. Why? Because you can say anything you want to, but no one will believe the things you say unless they see that your words are backed up by your actions. Kids are very good at that. Have you ever seen a kid with a parent that says, if you don't stop that, I'm going to smack. You know the kids who their parents have said that and backed it up, and the kids who his parents have said that and not. Because the kids that their parents threaten that all the time and then they never follow through, they don't stop, they don't quit. But if it's ever been backed up by an action, that kid gets right in line. So that's very important. Nobody will believe what you're saying unless you have shown them by your actions you're going to back it up. Our first quote began with the line, "People with good intentions make promises." So basically, people with good intentions say or can say a lot of things. They can make a lot of promises, but those promises don't mean anything unless they are followed up with action. And that's the second line of the quote. "But people with good character keep them," referring to the promises. Now, I'm assuming that all of us want to be people who have good character. I know that I do. So that means that I can't just talk a good game. I have to live a good game through my actions if I want to have any degree of integrity with myself first and with others. Okay, we talked about knowing yourself. Others won't think of you as a person of integrity unless you think of yourself that way. And that means that you follow through with the promises you make to yourself. So this phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Most all of us are familiar with it, but what does it really mean? We're going to get into that. First of all, let's briefly define our terms. Hell, as we've talked about before, is not a physical place where the devil lives and where bad people go after they die. Hell is a state of mind that is created by us or can be created by us right here on earth. It's a consciousness that you can live in or that you can choose to walk out of and not live in, no matter what's happening around you in your external world. The best definition I can give it is a total lack of love and inner peace. So that's what hell is. It is a total lack of love, a total lack of inner peace. Next, what are good intentions? The dictionary defines good intentions or intention singular as an act or instance of determining or focusing mentally upon some action or result, a positive purpose or attitude toward the effect of one's action or conduct. So we all have good intentions, most of the time anyway. Sometimes we slip into having bad intentions towards people or a situation, but for the most part, we have good intentions. We want good things to happen to ourselves as well as to other people. And actually, most of our bad intentions come from some situation or person doing or saying something against our good intentions. I know that might sound confusing, so let me say it like this. We all have opinions and beliefs about what we think is good or right or true, and when anything comes into our reality that seems to oppose those opinions and beliefs, then we tend to label those things as bad because that's what we do here in this realm of duality, like I talked about earlier, in this realm of opposites that we live in. We label things. We judge things because we have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And until we get back to the mindset that comes from the tree of life, instead, we will continue to do this. So, little side note here. Where does that lead? This judgment, this labeling of things. This leads to the ego. And we all know that the ego is created and lives in the mind, not in the heart. So let me read you a quick passage from Andrew Martin about this. He says, "You have been trying so hard to live from your ego, from the limited self that still believes in scarcity and lack and actually finds comfort there." Listen, but here's the thing. I love when he says, but here's the thing, because you always know some really good wisdom's coming after it. The mind doesn't care whether or not you are happy. The mind doesn't care if you are thriving. That's not its purpose or mission. All the mind cares about is that you are in a reality where you can read a script and play a role that it can predict inside and out, front to back, beginning, middle, and end. The mind likes it when you stay small and comfortable because that's what is predictable to it. However, your comfort zone isn't always comfortable. It's just familiar. We get really familiar with and therefore comfortable in our pain. Okay, we've talked about that before. Sometimes your story isn't necessarily a good story, but you don't leave that story. You keep telling that story, not because it's especially comfortable, but because you have become comfortable there because it is familiar. When spirit comes to us and shows us the way to be free of it, so many of us don't choose that path because we're not willing to go into unfamiliar territory. We get used to being or to wearing the mask of the broken one, the poor one, the unlovable one, the needy one, the angry one, the sick one, the excluded one, the frustrated one, the scared one. But that's not who you really are. That is who you have believed yourself to be. All right, so that's the end of the passage from Andrew. Now let me expand on it a little. He's saying that when we label ourselves, number one, it's always coming from the mind, from the ego, not our soul or our spirit or our heart. And number two, it's not who we really are, because who we truly are must come from our heart, from our spirit. He also adds that our mind/ego doesn't have our best interest or our highest good at heart. So that's a funny way to describe it, isn't it? It's kind of a play on words. We always say this person or that person doesn't have your best interest at heart, because the mind, that's where our best interests come from, are our heart, not the mind. So he's saying all the mind cares about is predictability. So don't depend on it for your happiness, your peace, or your ability to thrive. Here's another great saying of his. It's like, I've told this to you before. He always says, it's like trying to find your email looking at your calculator. Okay, it's like, that's not the function the calculator performs. You're never going to find it there. So it doesn't care. The mind doesn't care. The mind and the ego do not care about your happiness, do not care about your peace, only your homeostasis, okay? And sometimes that's not good. If you've gotten yourself into a homeostasis that's not good, the mind wants to keep you right there because that's what it understands. I'm going to add to this, to what he said, by saying because we are so used to labeling ourselves and because we are so comfortable behind our masks, and he lists a few of those: brokenness, poverty, unlovableness, neediness, anger, sickness, frustration, fear, etc. Because we do that all the time, and that is our mode of behavior toward ourselves, then we also do that to others. We like to label them and put them in boxes and categories and see them through their masks, because that's what we do to ourselves. One of the most fundamental principles in all the world religions is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto you, or as you would have them do unto you. So most of us say that's a life principle that we aspire to follow. But do we? Listen closely. It doesn't say do unto others as you do unto yourself. It says do what you as you would want to have done unto yourself, or in plainer English, what you would like to have done to you, how you would like for people to treat you. The premise is treat others as you want to be treated by them, but that's not the reality of what a lot of us do. Instead, we do to others exactly what we do to ourselves. We judge them and we label them. It's very similar to the concept of love, of the concept that we talk about loving ourselves first. We can't fully even love another person until we first love ourselves. That's what we just talked about in the devotion. This is the same principle. You can't stop labeling and judging others until you stop doing it to yourself. But I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. So let's get back to good intentions. When we believe in something, this thing, this belief, this process, this religion, this way of being is, when we believe something is good, then we judge and label everything and everyone we see as the opposite of that or different from it as bad, which is a good way to become stuck in life. Down here on a very low level of vibration, believing everyone must believe exactly as you do because you're right and your beliefs and your opinions are the ones that are good and true. And they may be. But here's the thing, as Andrew would say. The way you go about living and expressing or defending those beliefs and opinions of yours matters. And even if what you believe and what you're standing up for is good and righteous and true, if in the process of standing up for that thing or broadcasting that belief to the general public because you believe it's the best way, if in that process you hurt or judge or label, or worse, discredit or negate others, then that good, righteous, and true intention gets a little tainted, doesn't it? Many of us, in fact, I'm going to say everyone listening today, either in person or online, would consider ourselves to be spiritual people. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be listening if you weren't concerned about your spirituality. So if we are indeed spiritual people, then we should endeavor to live by spiritual principles. Okay, you still with me? So what is the most important spiritual principle, even according to Jesus? I've already alluded to it. Loving others as you love yourself and treating them as you want to be treated. And if we break that, the most fundamental of all spiritual principles, does anything else we say really hold any weight? I mean, that's pretty much the foundation of it. And again, if no, there's another little cliche that people say, that people don't, People don't know how much you care. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's like you've got to be that first before people will believe what you say. So, will we ever get someone who we believe to be on the other side of some issue from us to come over to our side, or to even see and acknowledge our point, if we don't show them love in the process? If all we ever do is judge them and label their belief as wrong or unacceptable, do you think they're going to be inclined to see your way if that's what you're doing to them? No. All that does is create hell, which we defined earlier as a total lack of love and peace. So even when our intentions are good, if we don't express them or demonstrate them, live them out in a way that is loving to others, then what have we gained? Nothing. Side note here that I want to explore further, perhaps in another teaching. Remember in the devotion it said something about finding your tribe. So finding your tribe is not the same thing as living in an echo chamber and dismissing everyone else who is not saying what you are saying. That's not what finding your tribe is. And I think a lot of people these days confuse those two. We'll get into more of that later. For now, I want to read you something from Amanda Ellis that she said way back in 2020. She says, "I keep hearing the thought in my head that there is no going any further or getting past the point where we are now until we get a few things sorted and fully understand some spiritual principles that we must begin following if we're going to move beyond the current level we're on as a species." Now, I just said that she said this back in 2020, and I've got to say, I don't think we've really progressed a whole lot in these past 4 years. If anything, I think what she's about to talk about has unfortunately gotten worse. She says, a lot of us, not everybody, but a lot of us are stuck. Some people understand the spiritual principles I'm about to speak of, but they are still compartmentalizing different parts of their lives, following these spiritual principles only when it suits them, and at other times living their lives as if principles don't apply. For example, when they begin to discuss politics. So we're coming up to an election. We're about to get into it just like we do every 4 years. But it could be anything. It could be race relations, religion, the vaccine, anything controversial. She's just using politics as one example of many. She continues, when politics comes up, for some people, all of the spiritual principles they say they believe in and try to emulate in their lives seems to go out the window. All right, so time out right here. Let me give you several real life examples of this, throwing your spiritual principles out the window while trying to stand up for something you believe in. One I witnessed personally, one I heard about firsthand, and one I saw on the internet. And these were all from several years ago. So example number one. Years ago, back in the 80s, a young man came to speak at our church. He was in his late 20s. At the time, I was in my early 20s, and he was the son of a prominent pastor from somewhere up north who was affiliated with our church through, that big thing we used to have, the Kingdom Network, of all these churches over the country. So his father had actually come to the church first and had seen me. and wanted very badly for his son to marry me because he was very interested in becoming a part of our family. So he sent his son down to speak one Sunday, and this guy didn't actually want to be a pastor. What he wanted was to go into politics, and but he was a decent speaker, and his father was a pastor, so he was pretty much at home in the pulpit. And so I admit I was pretty much into the idea. I had seen a picture of him, and I thought he was good looking, and he had called me on the phone a few times, and he was a real smooth talker. He had sent me flowers. He had done all the things. So when he came, I was kind of But when he got here and my whole family began to engage him in conversation, we very quickly realized that our politics, which is what he was most interested in, were very different from his. And he was extremely conservative, very vocally Republican. Nothing against Republicans, but our family has obviously always leaned to the other side. And so the topic came up about abortion. And he made a statement that really just made my blood run cold and completely changed my opinion of who he was as a person. He was obviously pro-life. And again, that's fine. I and my family have no argument with that. We may feel a little bit differently, but we certainly don't we don't judge people who are very staunchly pro-life. So anyway, he said this, though. I kind of was getting to the thing where I was kind of having the feeling I could agree to disagree with him on this. I was trying to, look for a way to get past this until he made the statement. He said, I wouldn't personally bomb an abortion clinic, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over it if someone else did. And at that point, I was out. He crossed the line when he said that. I mean, let's follow the logic here. You are anti-abortion supposedly because of your belief that all life is sacred. Yet you obviously don't hold the lives of any of the doctors or nurses or staff people that would have been in that clinic sacred if you're okay with someone throwing a bomb in there. So it makes no sense and defeats your whole line of reasoning there. So I swiped left on him before that was even a thing. So that's example number one. Example number two. I was on the phone a couple of years back with an old friend of mine who now lives in another state. And she was telling me about a situation that had happened in her family. A family member of hers had tragically and suddenly lost their spouse. He had passed away. And as families do at a time like that, they all began to gather at her house and to comfort the spouse who had just lost her husband and the children. In this case, it was her husband. It was a wife. And so eventually someone noticed that her father, who had just, the father of this girl who had just lost her husband, was not there. And they began to ask where he was and why. And sadly, the reason that was given by his wife was that because his son was there. And his son had not been vaccinated. And this was a huge issue to this man. And he decided at this particular time that this was the event, that this was the hill he was going to die on, right? This was it. This is where he was going to make his stand. So in other words, he wouldn't even come comfort his own daughter who had just lost her husband because he refused to be in the same room with his own son, her brother, who was there because he had not had the COVID vaccine. So his philosophical disagreement with his son over that issue was more important to him than being there for his daughter at the worst time of her life. Now, I know many, many people who feel very strongly that everyone should be vaccinated, okay? And that opinion was probably much more front and center back in 2020 when this was all going on, or 2021, whenever it was. And yes, that is a noble intention to want the best for everyone if that's what you think is the best. But let's dig a little deeper. Why? Presumably because you want people to get vaccinated because you want the best for them, okay? You want the best for everyone, including yourselves. So that very well may have qualified in this man's mind as a good intention. But how was it expressed? in a way that made his family, both his daughter and his son, feel loved and cared for by him? Did they believe he wanted the best for them by behaving this way? Probably not. In fact, I don't think that this young woman will probably ever get over the fact that her father wouldn't come see her that day. So, again, good intentions expressed wrongly or at the wrong time, without love, which we'll get to in a minute. Example number 3, I saw a video years ago, again, at the height of the pandemic. I seem to be having a lot of remembrances from that time. So this video was of these 2 older white women who were about to get in an elevator. And when the doors opened, they saw a young black man already in there, and they began to accost him and scream at him, not because he was black, but because he was not wearing a mask. And they went on and on about how he was putting them in danger. Now, they had their masks on, so I'm not really sure what they were completely afraid of, but they were literally demanding that this young man get off the elevator. And when he was the one that was on first, and he had not gotten to his floor yet. So the most ironic thing was that toward the end of the exchange, one of them yelled at him, "Black Lives Matter." And I'm not sure if she was trying to tell him that his black life was in danger by not wearing a mask, or to prove that she was not a racist old white lady. But it actually became comical that she would even say that to him because of the way she was acting. And he was extremely patient with them, more polite than a lot of people would have been to these women. And he kept trying to push the button that would close the door, and they would just keep sticking their hand in and continue yelling at him. And I'm thinking, you know what? If you're really so afraid of this guy breathing on you without a mask, wouldn't you just let the door close and wait for the next one to come? Okay, so that is when your good intentions go really, really wrong. So I'm sure that they thought their intentions were good. Perhaps they thought that they were actually educating this young man and that he didn't know, possibly saving his life. But the question is, was their behavior creating peace in any way? And was it in any way loving? No. So what did we say earlier? The total lack of peace and love is hell. So their intentions were paving the road, or a road, to hell in this case, because their actions did not match their words. So I'm fairly sure that young man did not come away from that experience at all thinking that his black life mattered to them, even though that's what they were saying. So there you have 3 examples of good intentions being expressed badly or at the wrong time, therefore pretty much nullifying them as good intentions. So we're going to go back to Amanda now. She says, whenever I release a video with political subject matter or talk about anything to do with social justice, I always get a few comments asking why I'm even touching on politics if this is supposed to be a spiritual channel. And this is because, as I said, people are compartmentalizing and thinking that the spiritual path and all it teaches, the principles of non-judgment, forgiveness, compassion, understanding, and love, don't apply when it comes to talking about politics. But truly, all parts of life are an expression of spirit. And so to think we can behave in a certain way in one situation and then suddenly put on our spiritual hat when we're in another setting really makes a mockery of our divine essence, which we should recognize within ourselves all of the time, or at least as much of the time as we can. So then she talks for a bit about how she sometimes gets criticized by the people who follow her channel on Facebook and YouTube for deleting certain comments that people post under her videos. They accuse her of deleting the comments of all the people who disagree with her. And so she spends some time explaining that it's not that, but it's rather that because she considers herself a spiritual teacher and her channel a spiritual channel, that she won't allow any comments that slander other people or that disrespect her or other people on a personal level. She's perfectly fine with comments of disagreement as long as they stick to the subject matter and that they don't devolve down into personal attacks. She also admits that she deletes threads where the commenters start going back and forth at each other and it just becomes fruitless to the point that, because she said she just doesn't want that energy on her page. And I get that. And because she is one of those people who tries to live by her spiritual principles all the time, no matter what the subject she's talking about is, not just some specific topic about spirituality itself. So she concludes by stating that there's a difference between the freedom to express your opinion and even disagree with others respectfully in a civil manner and having it devolve into name-calling and personal attack. There's nothing spiritual about that, and I wholeheartedly agree with her. All right, so now I want to tell you a story about a woman who lives in Great Britain and what happened to her as a result of a group of people on the internet who had good intentions. Something that's very important to understand in any situation is context. And that's all but lost these days, especially among people who are part of what we have come to know as the cancel culture. The context in which things are said or written matters. And that's another problem with judging and labeling. It's often done without any regard to the context which the thing was said or written in. We've lost what we call nuance. So here's the story. The woman's name is Kate Clancy. Kate Clancy is a teacher, poet, playwright, and multi-prize winning author. And until 2021, she was the most celebrated modern-day literary figure in the United Kingdom, or one of them, especially noted for her work with and support of young poets and writers. But in January of 2022, her books stopped being published by her previous publishing company, a publisher called Picador. How and why did this happen? We find out in excerpts from an interview with her, and I'm going to give you a few of them. Now, this is the interviewer speaking. Kate has been a teacher and a writer since 1995. Her first book of poetry came out in 1996, so she's not a rookie, and she's been doing this for a while. For more than a decade, she taught in a very multicultural school of children ranging from middle school to high school age, many of whom had been born in different countries or whose parents had been. So, meaning that, they themselves were either had been born in another country and had moved to Great Britain, or they were first generation, their parents had been born in another country and then moved to England. In 2018, she published a book of poetry written by her students, mostly recent migrants from other countries. When it first came out, it got a wonderful reception from the general public as well as from literary critics. The following year, in 2019, she published a personal memoir of her life containing lots of stories about the children she had taught over the years and what she had learned from them and about their cultures of origin and their experience of integrating into British culture. She wrote it in a manner that highlighted her personal experience of being from a middle-class British family and from the many stereotypes that had been part of that culture about the various cultures these children, her students, had come from. She described in the book how having personal relationships with these children had served to change or debunk many of the things she had previously believed as a result of her own upbringing and cultural lens. All right, so I want to stop right here and say, so here's a woman born and raised in middle-class British home who admittedly had certain opinions about other cultures other than her own because that was the lens she was given by her family and by her community. So she wrote this book about her experience of becoming a teacher at a multicultural school and thus coming into close contact and having relationships with actual children from these cultural backgrounds, which subsequently changed how she thought about those cultures. So that's a beautiful story, right? You would think, but you would be wrong. In 2020, some people online began to complain about this. And these are people who did not know how to mind their own business. Okay, they started to take issue with her book as well as the book that she had published of her students' poems, and accused her of exploiting the students, appropriating their culture, and being a racist because of some of the language she had used to describe her students. They claimed she had exoticized her students and that her book only served to further oppress cultures who were already being oppressed and marginalized in England. All right, so she tells this story in her memoir about trying to get some of her students back in the 1990s to talk about their heritage and where their families had come from, because she thought it would be interesting to the other students, but she couldn't get them to talk about it. So she soon realized it was because they desperately wanted to fit in to British culture, and because they were under such tremendous pressure to do so. So in this section of the book, she referred to one young man as having an Ashkenazi nose. Okay, so Ashkenazi is a particular sect of Jewish people. She wrote that description in the context of it being something he was very self-conscious about and even ashamed of, because it was a physical identifier of him as other than British. But she wanted and tried in her capacity as teacher to instill in him the idea that it was something he should be proud of his heritage. So she stated in the interview, "What I meant in writing that description was, you lovely kid, can't you see what a unique and amazing heritage you have? You should be proud of it." The exact quote from the book is, "I was baffled when a boy with jet black hair and eyes and a fine Ashkenazi nose refused to identify with his Jewish heritage at all. And for that, she was accused by her online detractors of racial profiling because of that one sentence that she wrote." She went on to explain that she had had many discussions with her students over the years about why they didn't want to identify with their own cultural backgrounds, and how she tried to show them the beauty of diversity and give them a safe place to discuss their challenges as well as their positive experiences as immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants. At one point, the man who was interviewing her said, "I suppose it's now taboo to mention anything about one's physical appearance as it relates to their cultural background. Even an affectionate and positive description seems to be politically incorrect. Is that where we are now?" And she answers, "In my experience, yes." Now, I know I'm kind of getting pretty deep into this, but I promise you it's for a reason. I want to read one more exchange from this woman as she was being interviewed to show the context of where she was coming from and what her intention and her purpose was for even writing about this. She says, "During the teenage years in school, there's nothing that children worry about more than their appearance. Schools are very physical places, and the teen years are very critical in the development of your self-esteem regarding your physical appearance. In every school, but most especially in a multicultural school, everyone looks different, especially in the south of England, where there are very recent migrants from every continent around the globe. And at this age, they want two things that seem to oppose each other. One, they want to fit in and be accepted as British citizens. And two, they also want their differences to be acknowledged, and for their differences and for themselves to be seen as individuals. Every encounter, therefore, is a delicate dance between these two desires and is even more difficult for immigrant children. I tried in this book to take my readers through some of these journeys that I had embarked on as a teacher. I learned, for example, that instead of being worried or troubled by having acne or being attractive enough, as some teenagers would be, one of my students was terrified of looking too Somalian. In fact, it was the biggest trauma of his life because he feared that his appearance and people's perception of his culture might endanger his family's visa status. That was not something I'd ever thought about before, and I felt it was an important story to include in the book. so that others could share the experience and imagine that pain, maybe causing them to rethink some of their own stereotypes and perceptions. So here's a woman who obviously cares deeply about her students and has not only tried to educate them academically, but to provide them with, as she said, a safe place to discuss the challenges of the rest of their lives, not just that related to their schooling and education. And she's also been able to confront some of her own perceptions and change the ones that she was taught that she found through her own experience had been wrong. She'd been an advocate for her students up to that point, even to the point where she had gotten a whole book of their poems published. So there's the context. Now to the rest of the story of what happened to her career and to her personal reputation in the space of 1 year because a group of people online and how they expressed their good intentions. So here's one more thing she says herself concerning the context of her book and the situation she was attempting to describe. She says, in the book, I never say, this is what this person is. I always say, this is how I perceived this person, and these were my perceptions. But maybe that's not good enough, at least if you don't read all the way to the end of the paragraph. Okay, so there it is. The people who were trashing her and trying to cancel her and calling her a racist online, they didn't read the whole paragraph. Therefore, they missed the context. They didn't mention that the end result was she admitted some of her perceptions had been wrong and that she had changed the way she believed because of her interactions with the students. They just picked out certain descriptive sentences and phrases that they found offensive, and they took them out of context and made it sound like she was saying something she was not saying and coming from a place that she was not coming from. They were also doing it in a very hateful manner, and they succeeded. Her book went from being celebrated and winning one of the most prestigious literary prizes in the United Kingdom in 2019 to 2 years later in 2021, her publishing company dropping her and issuing a public apology on her behalf without her knowledge or approval for her racism, and threatening to pull all of her books from their catalogs if she attempted to defend herself or dispute what they had said. All because some people online didn't like some things she had said and complained about them without any context and without telling the whole story. So they wrote an apology for her and told her she couldn't defend herself or explain herself or she would no longer be published by them, which is what ended up happening because she did respond. Now, this is the part that I really want us to focus on today. Everybody's so quick now to call other people out for things they've supposedly done wrong or for having views that are unacceptable to them or because they're just different from theirs. And sometimes they think they're doing the right thing. I'm sure that these people slept very well at night, completely believing they had defended some kids against a racist teacher. Standing up against racism is, in fact, a good intention. There's no question about that. But how were they doing it? How are you doing it? How am I doing it? Are you rushing to judgment and throwing a label on someone out of context and forgetting that they too are a human being? Listen to what else was going on in this woman's life during this time. That same year, this happened in 2020, both of her parents had died. She says this of how all of this affected her. They forgot that I was a human being altogether. When I read my publishing company's apology for my supposed racism, I had never been so shocked in all my life. No one spoke to me about it directly. They just issued the apology on my behalf. That night, I decided to kill myself, and I had never ever even thought like that before. I think I'm a pretty resilient person, but I was astonished by the strength of that idea, the idea of actually committing suicide. I have children, so I didn't do it, but I shocked myself at how close I came. People were accusing me of something I fundamentally hate and have always fought against, racism, and there was nothing I could do about it. As a writer, to have my words disordered and taken out of context and to have all of my books disparaged and discarded was devastating. Twitter, which it was called at the time, is a lot like a play with characters. People entirely forget that they're speaking to or about an actual person. There is absolutely no empathy anymore. And that's where her quote ends. So, empathy, putting yourself in another person's place, walking a mile in another's shoes, doing unto others as you would have done unto you. That seems to be sorely missing in much of society today, even by people who consider themselves spiritual and who have good intentions. At the end of the interview, the host, the man interviewing her, came back around to this topic of good intentions. And here's the point he made, which is the point I'm also trying to make today. He said, what is so confusing about this and what these people did is that it is coming from a good instinct, at least in theory, the prosecution of something that's bad, racism, the protection of vulnerable groups, these migrant children. He says the difficulty of choosing the middle way is that the extremes on both sides only see their enemy behind you. All right, so let's stop right here and get this visual. If you choose the middle path, which I believe we all try to do here, and I always try to do, then the people over here on this extreme, when they look at you, they don't really see you. All they see is this other extreme over here. And when these people in this extreme look at you, all they see is these people behind you and kind of lump you in with them because you're not all the way on their side. They assume you're all the way on the other side. All right, because when you're in an extreme state of mind, anyone other than people who think just as extremely as you do on your side is the enemy. And guess what? People on both sides of the spectrum believe that their intentions are good. All right, so to illustrate this further, we seem to be right back now in 2024 where we were in 2020. We even have the same two men wanting to become president, and all of the people who are for Trump think they're right and true and good, and that everybody that's voting for Biden is crazy and evil and bad. And all the people that are for Biden, not all, but some, think all of these people over here for Trump are crazy and evil. So, I'm not going to go any further with that. So when we do this, even though you may believe your side is right and you have good intentions, what you're doing is you're creating hell because you are not speaking the truth in love as the Bible instructs us to do. Even if we are speaking the truth, if it is not done in love, it's not really accomplishing anything. Back to Amanda. It's very easy to get entrenched in a particular position, even if you're trying to walk the middle path. And let me say this about what the middle way is not. It is not that you don't have an opinion about anything. This is the great misunderstanding that somehow, if you've chosen the middle way, you're just sitting on the fence with no opinion as some sort of blank slate. That is not my understanding of sacred neutrality. You can absolutely have opinions on all sorts of subjects. In fact, you must, because you're a human being and not a robot. You're going to feel strongly about things. You are meant to react and to interact with the world, but you must try to stay open to both sides of the debate, whatever it is. And yet, the ultimate effect of that was so vicious, all right? So sometimes the effect of that can be vicious if you don't handle it appropriately. Here's a quote by Nietzsche, a couple of sentences, and then a couple of sentences expanding it by a guy I listen to. His name is Aubrey Marcus. The quote is, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster himself." So then he writes, "To everyone who has been slandered, ridiculed, censored, and canceled for voicing what you believe in, I hear you. I know you are angry. I know that some part of you seeks vindication, and this impulse is only human. But acting from that place will not create the world we are fighting for. The rage or outrage is important, but it is meant to be alchemized into determination, art, and the fire that is the forge of our spirit. So I love the way he worded that. Basically, he's saying it's okay to have strong opinions and to voice those opinions and to stand up for what you believe in. But you've got to remember that we're never going to have the end result we want, which is a new earth, more like heaven and less like hell, if we're constantly creating hell by our actions. You can't get there from here. There is no bridge from there. And you cannot become a monster in order to fight monsters. All right? If we do that, we only end up with more monsters. Like, what is that thing Gandhi said? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth only leaves the whole world blind and toothless. So Amanda Ellis here reminds us of the importance of, but also the difficulty of choosing the middle way, or something she refers to in this next piece as sacred neutrality. There is also a proviso to that, however, which involves boundaries. She says, I'm open to hear you as long as you're respectful. Every single person on our planet has something to contribute to the collective debate, and as long as they speak respectfully, they have a right to be heard. We must remember that in the end, we all belong to each other, and we all need each other. End quote. So on that note, I want to end with a thought from a series that I watched a while back on Netflix called Connected, where this researcher goes all around the world showing how everyone and everything is connected. And when we forget that, that's when we start expressing our good intentions badly, which only creates for us and everyone around us a hell on earth. It's okay to have good intentions, but the way we express them and walk them out makes all the difference. In this particular episode that I was watching, the researcher travels to the middle of the Sahara Desert and goes to a place that used to be covered by water thousands and thousands of years ago, but now it's dried up. In fact, it is the driest place on the face of the earth. But what remains there are still the skeletons and the detritus that used to be fish and crocodiles and even algae that once lived and swam in the waters, because and it's all been really well preserved because it's been so dry. And so every year, a little more of that fossilized dust gets blown all the way across the earth because there's such strong winds there because there's not a lot of trees. So when the wind comes, it blows that dust and sand very far, and it blows it all the way across to the Amazon rainforest. Now, there are no more two opposite regions on the earth than the Sahara Desert and the Amazon rainforest. And for the purpose of our analogy and in light of our teaching today, you can picture those two places as the current extremes that exist in our society on a number of things. Here's a little piece from the show. It says the ecosystems of very different regions of the earth are strongly interconnected. Thousands of tons of Saharan desert dust are blown regularly to the Amazon rainforest. An interesting fact about the Amazon region is that the soil is very unfertile because the rain is constantly washing away the nutrients like phosphorus. But guess what else contains phosphorus? The fossilized corpses of the long dead residents of the now dry lake basin in the Sahara Desert. All right, so all of these fossilized remains contain phosphorus, which in the Amazon, because it rains so much, keeps getting washed away. Every year, an estimated 22,000 tons of Saharan phosphorus lands in the Amazon rainforest, almost exactly the amount that it loses due to rain and flooding. So, The dust that falls from the sky replenishes what gets washed away. Without the dust, the Amazon may not have what it needs to keep going. Dust from the Sahara Desert actually keeps the rainforest region stable. So, without the world's driest, most desolate place, the world's most vital and vibrant place wouldn't be what it is. Out of death comes life. Every creature makes its own contribution. The dust of the dead skeletons contribute to the life of another biodiversity on the other side of the planet. That's the beauty of nature. And that was the end of the show, and I just love that. It's kind of like what we were talking about with the stabilizing statements. When you're in the middle, you get what's coming from here, and you get what's coming from here, and together they make perfection. So that's also the balance and the equilibrium that we need. We need diversity. We can't all be the same. We shouldn't all be the same. Our whole society works because we are different. And once we remember that and appreciate that and respect that, perhaps we will stop trying so hard to force our piece of the puzzle, that part that we have to contribute, our unique opinion onto everyone else. Because no matter how good our intentions are, if we're not living and speaking and interacting with each other in a loving way, then our good intentions are only paving the road to hell, a place without love and without peace. So let's get back to the most basic, the most fundamental spiritual principle: loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, and treating everyone, no matter how different their opinions and beliefs are from ours, in the way we want to be treated. Simple, not always easy. But that's the middle way. And in the end is a very rewarding and balanced way to live. And it is also the basis for how to properly use the power of intention, which we're going to get into a little bit more next week. Amen? Amen. Let's stand together. Mom's here today, so she's going to play for us.
Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen. Blessed always, for the arms of God surround us. Let our joy be so triumphant that we rest in God and say amen.
Amen. Be at peace. Have a great week. I love you.